The next morning was cold and bright. Ethan was down at his sawmill early because he had to take some wood to the village builder that day. The winter sun burned red in a clear sky, and the sunlight danced over the bright snowy fields, leaving deep blue shadows under the trees. Ethan's thoughts were always clearest when he was working in the quiet morning air. Last night, after the bedroom door had closed behind them, Zena had taken her medicine and gone to bed without a word. Ethan lay next to her, watching the light from under Maddie's door, and thinking, why had he not kissed her on the walk home? He remembered her soft lips in the moonlight. Now, in the clear morning sunshine, he could still see her face. He could see it in the red sky and in the bright shining snow. Maddie was the daughter of Orrin Silver, a cousin of Zena Fromm's. Silver's medicine company had seemed successful, and he had lived like a rich man. But when he died, his wife and daughter had a terrible surprise. They discovered that he had borrowed thousands of dollars, which he could not pay back. This awful news killed Mrs. Silver immediately. He had also lost money which belonged to his brothers and sisters. So there was nobody in the family who wanted to help poor Maddie. The 20-year-old girl was alone in the world, without money and without friends. She was not strong, and she had never studied or learnt to do a job. So Maddie came to Starkfield to work without pay in her cousin Zena's home. At first, Zena often complained about the girl's work. Then, as the months went by, Maddie grew stronger and found the work easier. Zena had more time to think about her illnesses, and life under the Fromm's roof became more peaceful. But now, Zena's strange silent looks, the warning in Maddie's eyes last night. Ethan was sure that something was wrong. By midday, the wood was all loaded, ready to take to Andrew Hale, the builder. But Ethan decided to go home. If there was going to be trouble, he wanted to be there. So Ethan and Jotham Powell, his hired man, walked through the fields back to the house. When they entered the kitchen, Maddie was making coffee. Zena was sitting at the table, wearing her best brown dress and a tall hat. A suitcase stood beside her. "Where are you going, Zena?" asked Ethan, surprised. "My pains are getting really bad. I'm going over to my aunt's in Bettsbridge for the night, and tomorrow I'll see that new doctor," she answered. "If you're too busy, I suppose you can let Jotham Powell drive me to the station." Ethan said nothing. He was lost in his own thoughts. He realized that, for the first time, he and Maddie would be alone for the night. He looked at Maddie. Was she thinking the same thing? Then he looked at his wife's thin, lined, bloodless face. Zena was 35, only 7 years older than he was, but she was already an old woman. "Of course Jotham'll take you," he said at last. "I can't do it myself, because I've got to get the money for the wood from Andrew Hale." This was a lie. Andrew Hale never paid immediately. But Ethan really had no wish to make the long, slow journey to the station with his miserable wife at his side. Zena made no reply, and soon afterwards she left with Jotham. Ethan picked up his coat and stood for a moment in the doorway. "See you later, Matt," he said. It was warm and bright in the kitchen. The sun shone in on the flowering pot plants by the window and the cat sleeping in a chair. Mattie looked up from her housework. "See you later, Ethan," she said happily. All the way down to the village, Ethan thought of his return to Mattie that night. Without Zena, his house seemed more like a home. And as he drove through the snowy fields, this usually silent man began to sing. Ethan Frome had not always been so quiet and lonely. As a student, he had liked being among happy, friendly young people. He had enjoyed his science studies and wanted to become an engineer. But after his father's accident and death, Ethan had to leave his studies and return home. Life was hard for him, working alone on the poor farm and unsuccessful sawmill. Then his mother fell ill and became more and more silent. Sometimes she used to say a few crazy words, but for most of the time she refused to speak at all. So, with each long, cold Starkfield winter, the silence and loneliness round Ethan grew deeper. As his mother came towards her last illness, Ethan's cousin, Zena, arrived to take care of her. It was wonderful to hear another person's voice in the house again. And Zena was an excellent nurse and housekeeper. Old Mrs. Frome finally died one dark winter's day, and the idea of being alone again filled Ethan with fear. He was grateful to Zena for all that she had done, and he asked her to stay and marry him. They had at first planned to sell the farm and move to the town, but it was hard to find a buyer, and Ethan soon realized that his wife could not live in a place where she was not someone important. In less than a year, her sickliness appeared. Then she too fell silent. Her strange, wordless looks worried Ethan. Was she going a little crazy, like his mother? What thoughts and plans were hidden behind her cold eyes? But that afternoon, as Ethan drove to the village with his sleigh full of wood for the builder, he felt less afraid. Zena had gone away to Bettsbridge, with all her thoughts on her own health, and tonight he had an evening alone with Mattie. But there was still one worry: the lie about the money from Andrew Hale. He knew that Zena would want to know where it was. When Ethan arrived at the builders, Hale invited him into his office to sit down and get warm. He was a large, red-faced, and likable man, an old friend of Ethan's family. Ethan did not know how to begin, but at last he managed to ask Hale for the first $50 towards this winter's wood. The builder was surprised. He always paid at the end of 3 months, never before. He refused in his warm, friendly way, and then asked, "Look, you ain't got money problems, have you?" "No, not at all," replied Ethan, very embarrassed. The afternoon had turned into a cold, gray evening by the time Ethan left the builders. He heard the sound of sleigh bells, and Dennis Eady drove past, shouting, "Hello, Eth!" Eady was going towards the Frome farm. Did he know that Zeena had gone? Was he going there to spend some time alone with Maddie? Ethan felt wildly jealous. Then, moments later, was ashamed of his feelings. By the Varnum house, Ethan saw 2 figures standing together under the trees. He heard a kiss and a surprised "Oh!" as he passed by. 2 happy lovers kissing where he had stood with Maddie the night before. But unlike him, Ruth Varnum and Ned Hale didn't need to hide their feelings. How lucky they were. As night fell, Ethan passed by the Frome gravestones and drove up to the farmhouse. A light shone in her room upstairs. "She's getting herself ready for supper," he thought. Chapter 4. An Evening Together. Ethan went up to the kitchen door and found that it was locked. He called, "Hello, Matt," but there was no answer. He stood in the darkness and waited. After a moment, he heard a sound on the stairs and saw light round the door. And just like the night before, the door opened, and there stood a woman with a lamp in her hand. The lamplight shone on the milky whiteness of Maddie's young skin, on her soft lips and shining dark eyes. She smiled gently and stepped to the side to let Ethan come in. The kitchen was warm and welcoming. On the table were cakes and fruit in a bright red glass dish, and the cat was lying lazily in front of a warm fire. "Well, Matt, any visitors?" asked Ethan. "Just one," replied Maddie, laughing. A black cloud came down over Ethan's world. "Who is that?" She looked at him and laughed again. "Jotham Powell. He came in and asked for a drop of coffee." The blackness lifted, and Ethan's world grew bright again. "Well, I hope you gave him some," he said, then added, "I suppose Zeena got to the station in time?" Zeena's name brought an immediate coolness into the kitchen. After a few moments, Maddie said, "I guess it's about time for supper," and they sat down. But they still felt uncomfortable. Xena seemed to be in the room with them, with her cold eyes and strange looks. They ate in embarrassed silence, then began to talk about the weather. As they were speaking, the cat climbed quietly onto the table and started to move towards the milk jug. When they saw it, they both reached forwards at once, their hands meeting on the jug. Ethan kept his hand on Maddie's a few seconds longer than was necessary. At that moment, the cat suddenly jumped backwards and knocked into the red glass dish. The dish fell to the floor with a crash. "Oh, Ethan," Maddie cried. "It's all in pieces. What will Xena say? It was her very best dish." "Don't worry. I'll get another one." "You'll never find one. It was a wedding present from her aunt in Philadelphia. That's why she never uses it. I had to climb up to get it from the top of her cupboard. Oh, Ethan, what shall I do?" She began to cry, and her tears seemed to burn into Ethan's heart. "Oh, Matt, don't cry. Please don't cry," he said softly. They looked at the bits of red glass lying like the broken pieces of their evening. Ethan picked them up and walked out of the kitchen to the hall. Reaching up his long arm, he put the broken pieces at the top of the cupboard and arranged them carefully. From below, nobody could see that the dish was broken. "I'll get some glue to mend it tomorrow," thought Ethan. "Xena won't look at it for months, and I'm sure I'll find another one somewhere." He went back to the kitchen. "It's all right, Matt," he said. "Let's finish supper." After the meal, Maddie cleared the table, and Ethan went out to see the cows. The world was dark and still outside. When he came back, Maddie had pushed his chair near the fire and had seated herself by the lamp with a bit of sewing. He sat down, feeling warm and dreamy and at peace with the world. The only trouble was that he could not see Maddie from where he sat. But he felt too lazy to move, and after a moment he said, "Come over here and sit by the fire." Maddie got up and sat opposite him in Xena's rocking chair. He looked at the chair, and for a moment he saw his wife's grim face there. Maddie seemed to feel uncomfortable too. After a while, she got up, saying, "I can't see to sew," and went back to sit by the lamp. The cat jumped into the empty rocking chair, and Ethan moved his own chair a little. Now he could see Maddie as she sat and sewed in the soft lamplight. A deep quiet came over the kitchen. The tick-tick of the clock was the only sound in the room, and the smoke from Ethan's pipe and the smell of Maddie's flowering plants filled the air. They began to talk easily of everyday things. It all seemed so comfortable and so peaceful. Ethan began to dream that they always spent their evenings like this. "This was the night when we were going coasting," he said after a while. She smiled back at him. "I guess you forgot." "No, I didn't forget. It's too dark tonight. But we can go tomorrow, if there's a moon." "That would be lovely, Ethan." Mattie laughed happily, and her eyes shone in the lamplight. Ethan loved the way that her face changed as she talked, like a field of grass moving under a gentle summer wind. "It's too dangerous on a dark night like this," he went on. "You've got to keep your eyes open on that slope, you know, Matt. That's a dangerous corner down by that big tree. You could crash right into it if you're not careful." Then he added, "I guess we're fine here, aren't we?" "Yes, we're fine here," agreed Mattie in a soft, sweet voice. Ethan put down his pipe and pulled his chair up to the table. He touched the end of her piece of sewing. "Say, Matt, guess what I saw tonight? Your friends kissing under the Varnum trees." Mattie's face turned bright red. "That'll be Ruth and Ned," she answered, looking down at her sewing. Ethan felt embarrassed too. Last night, on their walk home, he had put his arm around Mattie and had wanted to kiss her. But tonight, in the warm, lamp-lit room, she seemed so much further away. "I guess they'll get married soon," said Ethan. "And then maybe you'll be next." "Why do you say that?" she replied in a low voice. "Is it because Zena doesn't want me to stay?" "What do you mean?" asked Ethan, afraid again. "I thought that last night she seemed... Oh, I don't know. Nobody knows what Zena thinks. She hasn't said anything to you, has she?" He shook his head. "No, not a word." "I guess it was nothing then." "Let's not think about it," said Mattie, and went on with her sewing. Ethan watched her in silence. Then he gently took hold of the other end of her piece of sewing. Mattie's warmth seemed to flow along it towards him. Could she feel the answering warmth from his own hand? They sat like this for a few moments. Then Ethan heard a sound behind him. The cat had jumped down from Zena's chair, and because of the sudden movement, the empty chair had started a ghostly rocking. "Zena'll be in that chair herself this time tomorrow," thought Ethan. "I've been in a dream, and this is the only evening we'll ever have together." The return to the real world filled him with pain, and he suddenly felt very tired. Mattie looked at him, and for a moment he saw fear cross her face. He held on to her sewing and kissed the end of it softly. She pulled it slowly from his lips and put it away. It was 11 o'clock. "Is the fire all right?" she asked in a low voice. They checked the fire, moved the plant pots away from the cold window, and put out the lamp. "Good night, Matt," he said, as she put her foot on the first step of the stairs. "Good night, Ethan," she answered, and went up. When the door of her room had closed, he remembered that he had not even touched her hand. Chapter 5. Zena's News. The next morning, Jotham Powell came round early to help load some more wood. Ethan could still feel inside him the sweetness of the evening before, and he tried hard not to show his happiness. He did not know why he felt so happy. There was no reason for it, because nothing had changed in his life or in Maddie's. But their evening together had given him a dream, a picture of life with Maddie at his side. He wanted to load the wood quickly and then drive it down to Starkfield, where he could buy the glue to mend the broken dish. He was sending Jotham to fetch Zena from the station after dinner, so they needed to work fast. But the morning went badly. A wet snow had fallen in the night, and the roads were like glass. One of his horses fell and cut its leg. Icy rain started to fall, making the loading slow and difficult. It was after midday when they finished. Immediately after dinner, Ethan put his coat on again. Jotham was drying his wet feet by the fire, and Maddie was washing the dishes. "I'll be back early," Ethan said to Maddie in a low voice. He was afraid to say more in front of Jotham, but he thought that Maddie understood him. The journey down to the village was long and slow, with his 2 old horses pulling their heavy load over the snow and ice underfoot. By the time he had unloaded the wood and managed to buy the glue, it was already late afternoon. On the way back, the rain began again, turning to ice as it fell on the snow, and making the road even more glassy and dangerous. Once or twice, Ethan heard sleigh bells and turned round, afraid that Jotham and Zena were coming up behind him. But for most of the journey, he just looked grimly into the falling rain as his tired horses made their way up the hill. At last, he arrived home and hurried into the kitchen. Maddie was alone. "Look, Matt," he cried. "I've got the glue to mend the dish with. Quick, let me get it." "Oh, Ethan, Zena's back," she said in a whisper, holding on to his arm. Ethan looked round the kitchen, which looked cold and unwelcoming in the wintry evening light. "How is she?" he asked, in the same low whisper. "I don't know. She didn't say anything. She just went straight upstairs." Ethan put the glue back in his pocket. "Don't worry. I'll come down and mend the dish in the night," he said. Then, just as she had done the evening before, Maddie said, "I guess it's about time for supper." Ethan called Zena, but there was no answer. He went up to the bedroom, and pushed open the door. In the darkness, he saw Zena's figure sitting by the window, still wearing her traveling dress. "Well, Zena, supper's ready. Ain't you coming?" "I don't think I could eat a thing," she replied, then turned her head towards him. "I'm much sicker than you think." "I hope that's not so, Zena." "The doctor says I mustn't do anything at all in the house, so we'll have to get a hired girl." "A hired girl?" "Yes, my aunt's found me one already. She's coming tomorrow afternoon." "Why didn't you tell me what you planned to do?" he asked angrily. "Where do you think I'll get the money to pay her?" "How did I know what the doctor would say? I'm ashamed to have a husband like you, Ethan Frome. I lost my health taking care of your own mother. Marrying me was the least that you could do after Zena." The darkness between them was filled with anger. It was their first moment of open fighting in their sad 7 years together. Ethan felt ashamed and tried to speak more calmly. "You know I don't have the money, Zena. She'll have to go back." "What about that $50 from Andrew Hale?" He remembered the lie he had told the day before. "I guess that was a mistake." "You mean you ain't going to get it?" "No. I'm sorry, Zena. You're a poor man's wife, but I'll do the best I can to help you." "Oh, I guess we'll manage," she said more gently. "And without Maddie's food to pay for—" "Without Maddie's?" he began. Zena laughed. It was a strange sound. He couldn't remember hearing her laugh before. "You didn't think Maddie was staying, did you?" "But you can't send her away. She's your cousin." "Well, we can't keep 2 girls here." Ethan could not believe what he was hearing. "Ethan, Zena, supper's ready," Maddie called brightly from downstairs. Ethan felt angry and helpless. But where will she go? A poor girl with no friends or money? "She's been here long enough. We've kept her for over a year now, and it's time for her to go." Ethan looked at his wife with eyes full of hate. It was an angry, bitter hate. It was a hate which had grown during years of hard work, hopeless poverty, and broken dreams. This woman had destroyed all his hopes. She had taken everything from him, and now wanted to take the one beautiful thing left in his life. He made a sudden, violent movement towards her, then stopped. "I don't think I'll come down," said Zena calmly. "I guess I'll just lie on the bed a while." Ethan went downstairs to the kitchen, and Maddie gave him a plate of food. He took a mouthful, then pushed the plate away. "What's the matter, Ethan? Doesn't it taste right?" "It's fine, Matt. Only He stood up quickly. She looked at him with frightened eyes. "I knew there was something wrong. What is it, Ethan? What is it?" He took her in his arms and found her lips at last. He kissed and kissed her. He was lost in the sweetness of her lips. Then she pulled away from him, her face white with fear, and he cried out, "You can't go, Matt. I'll never let you go." "Go? Go?" she whispered. "Must I go? Ethan, what has happened? Is Zena angry with me?" He told her what the doctor had said. Matty looked so small and helpless. His heart ached for her, and he wanted to hold her in his arms again. They were silent for a long while. Then Matty said in a low voice, "Don't be too sorry, Ethan." "Oh, Matt, Matt, where'll you go?" "Maybe I'll get something to do in town." But they both knew that she had little chance of finding a job. There were too many people looking for work in the towns, and there were no jobs that Matty could do. And Ethan knew what happened to girls who had no job, no money, and no friends. He sat down in despair and hid his face in his hands. Then they heard Zena's footsteps on the stairs. She came down wearing her usual dress. Then she sat down in her usual seat and took a large plateful of food. She ate well and talked in an everyday way about the illnesses of her friends and family in Bettsbridge. As she spoke, she looked at Matty with a small smile on her thin lips. When supper was finished, she stood up and said, "That meal's given me a stomach ache. I think I'll go and look for the stomach medicine that I bought last year." She left the room. Ethan's and Matty's eyes met, full of silent despair. The kitchen looked as warm and peaceful as the night before, but now everything had changed. Then suddenly Zena was back, her face burning with anger. In her hands she held the broken pieces of the red glass dish. "I want to know who did this," she said in a shaking voice. "I can tell you. It was the cat," answered Ethan after a few moments. "The cat? How did the cat get into my hall cupboard?" "Oh, Zena, it was my fault, not Ethan's," cried Matty. "I got it down from your cupboard. I wanted the supper table to look pretty." "You wanted the supper table to look pretty. So you took my very best dish, the one that I never ever use, not for visitors, not for anyone. You're a bad girl, Matty Silver, just like your father. I always knew you were bad. That's why I hid my things from you. And now you've taken the thing that I cared for the most." Tears ran down her thin, yellowish face. Then she left the room, carrying the pieces of broken glass like a dead body.